Dean's Hour, Bible Theology Live, Episode 5, The Radiography of Sin. What I have on the background is not the representation of the Trinity or philoxenia to Abraham, but the oldest representation of Satan in the Byzantine art. This is the oldest representation of Lucifer, humanoid depiction, as an angel with aura, but in blue, associated to the goats, in the scene of final judgment, Matthew 25. This is a mosaic from 520 AD in St. Apollinaris Basilica in Ravenna. This is a very close representation to what the Old Testament has to say about Satan, a prosecutor at God's court, an angel of sorts. But the blue color tells us in this mosaic that he is Lucifer. The other angel is Archangel Michael, associated with the sheep. And in the center is Jesus, very young, with a beard. But now let's talk about the sin, a radiography of sin. The word sin in Hebrew chata, missing the target, amartia in Greek, appears for the first time in the Bible in Genesis 4:7, in the story of Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel runs like this. Cain was the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, followed by his brother Abel. Hebrew Hebel means breath, perhaps a symbolic name hinting at Abel's short life. The narrator tells us that both brothers brought thanksgiving offerings to Yahweh God. Cain offered some of the fruit of the earth, while Abel sacrificed the firstlings of his flock. God looked with favor to Abel's offering while disregarding Cain's offering. The narrator does not reveal the reason of God's partiality. Ancient commentators, based on the word firstlings used in Abel's case, assume that Abel brought the best of his flock, while Cain brought inferior offering. This old Jewish interpretation is reflected by the free rendition of the Septuagint of Genesis 4:7, where we read, quote, "If you, Cain, offer correctly, but do not divide correctly, have you not sinned?" End of quote. These are the words of God speaking to Cain, according to the Septuagint. According to the Septuagint translator, Cain sinned, Greek verb amartano, because he did not divide diereo correctly the fruits of the earth. Namely, he kept the good fruits for himself and offered to God the bad fruits, a deficient offering. The Greek Septuagint version of Genesis 4:7 differs entirely from the Hebrew text, which reads as follows, quote, "Surely if you do good, tov, there is uplifting. But if you do not do good, sin, hata, couches, robets at the door, petach. Its desire, teshuka, is toward you, yet you can master it," end quote. Due to the lack of grammatical agreement between the noun hata, feminine, meaning sin, and the active participle robets, masculine. This is the regular rendition of the Hebrew text. Nevertheless, we can offer a better, more accurate translation of the first part of Genesis 4:7, more precisely of this clause, sin couches at the door. The following rendition that I propose takes into account the grammar and linguistic subtleties. Here is my proposed translation. Sin, Rabitsu, is at the opening. In Genesis 4:7, the first occurrence, sin is personified, almost deified, terrifying one with her desire after humans, imitating God in his love for humans, but perverting, turning an uplifting love into destructive desire. The Hebrew active participle robetz is perhaps the Hebrew version of Akkadian word rabitsu, with an A turning into a O, into the so-called the Canaanite shift, designating the lingering demon, also known as the lurker, who hides in ambush in the Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. In internet culture of today, a lurker will be someone who is online, observing, but not participating. This is actually the situation with the sin, observing, but not participating. In Genesis 4:7, Rabitsu is in opposition with sin, further qualifying the sin as a demon in the hands of a deity-like entity, like a storm wind with no moral qualification, neither good nor evil, dispatched by God Enlil in Sumerian mythology, the god of sky. And in Genesis 4:7, the opening, petach in Hebrew, of a tent is mentioned, which the Rabitsu storm wind can open it even wider, making the human being vulnerable to bad influences from outside. Rabitsu are commonly depicted as elusive spirits that suddenly spring upon the unsuspecting victims. This particular characteristic has shaped their representation as beings that patiently lurk, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. This is what the evil angels, devils, are doing, nothing but expecting that humans will make mistakes and they will report to God, or amplifying the effect and consequences of human bad decisions. Devils are lazy as Rabitsu, waiting, observing, but not bothering even to intervene. They are there to harvest the sinfulness of man without doing anything. Rabitsu do not adhere to a conventional family structure as commonly understood. Instead, they are regarded as beings dispatched by the prominent Sumerian and Akkadian deity Enlil, a major figure associated with earth, sky, atmosphere, and storms. The Rabitsu, rather than functioning as malevolent, autonomous demons, served as intermediaries, connecting the divine entities of heaven and earth. So they are not independent deity-like entities, but simply demons, servants of a deity, like demons, devils under Satan and Judeo-Christian theology. In Genesis 4:7, the sin is Rabitsu, a demon. But who is behind him? A serpent? The dragon? Satan? Most likely so. Returning to Genesis 4:7, and here no proposed reading, we're able now to understand the full meaning of God's words to Cain. Refreshing the gist of Cain and Abel's story, we may say that Cain became angry because God favored the gifts of his brother Abel, while ignoring his gifts. In Cain's opinion, there was no reason why God was so partial and subjective. At this critical moment, God is approaching Cain. Do you remember, according to Genesis 3, God was still walking on earth at the dawn of human history? He was walking through the Garden of Eden and asked him why he is angry. So God asked Cain, why are you angry and depressed? Then God goes this way. When you are doing good, there should be an uplifting. In other words, you should be happy, serene. Why are you angry and depressed now? Because you didn't do anything bad. And God goes speaking to Cain, but if you do not do good, then here is what will happen. Sin, that Rabitsu-demon, will be at the opening of your tent, of your heart, blowing with force as a strong wind, because his desire toward you is very strong. In any event, you may overcome the sin if you really want to. So doing good, being proactive, and doing good will shelter us from trouble, will bring peace and uplifting to our hearts. But if we are not proactive, if we are not do good in season or out of season, then we'll have to cope with sin, a demon-like, which is lurking at the opening of our heart. Human person is compared here with a tent that has an opening, and by the blowing of a strong wind, the opening can become much wider, and we are becoming more vulnerable to the assaults of evil influences. Sin is there as a storm wind, like demon, widening the opening of our hearts. In Genesis 4:7, sin is depicted as a terrifying beast, already extant with God within God's creation or world. We are not told how sin entered in God's creation, but enigmatically, sin is already at work in this world in Genesis 4:7. That is why the psalmist declares almost emphatically, quote, I was brought forth in iniquity, I was conceived in sin, end quote, or more precisely, into a world of sin. In Psalm 51:7, the sin does not designate the sexual, intimate relationship between a man and a woman united through marriage and procreating their children, but rather it refers to this world replete with sin. Everyone who is born in this world is born in sin, meaning he is cast into a world replete with sin. St. Paul speaks about sin entering this world through Adam's first act of disobedience in Romans 5:12-13. Quote, therefore, just as sin came into the world through a man, the enos anthropo, and death came through sin, dietis amartias, and so death spread to all, because all have sinned. Sin was indeed in the world before the law, but sin is not reckoned when there is no law, end quote. How can we interpret FO in Romans 5 with respect to him, Adam, the sin? We are all sinners. So according to Paul, the sin appearing suddenly in Genesis 4:7 entered the world as a consequence of Adam's disobedience in Genesis 3. However, the author of Genesis 1-11, the primordial story in the Bible, does not make such a correlation between sin and Adam's deed or partial attention, parakouie, as the fathers of the church calls the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. For Paul, sin is an unborn tendency to do evil, inherited by all humans because of Adam's fall. Death is not a natural part of life, like in the case of all living beings, but rather a consequence of or punishment for sin, according to Paul. This is Paul's view. As we know, Paul was a Pharisee. However, not all the Pharisees had the same view on sin as Paul had. For instance, 2nd Baruch, a Jewish writing composed at the end of the 1st century AD, reminds one that we become like Adam when each of us sins. In other words, we do not inherit the sinfulness from Adam. The sinfulness belongs to us. There is no such original sin, according to this writing, 2nd Baruch. From Genesis 4:7 to Matthew 25:31-46, the sin of the last judgment, the Christian Bible teaches us that doing good will keep us out of trouble and sin, will not find any opening to enter within us. Also, doing good is following the law of love brought by Jesus. This is the standard by which we are going to be evaluated or judged at the end of time. According to goodness, that we could easily do it, but we did not do it. For instance, giving a glass of water to a thirst person. Evil inclinations. Genesis 6:5 reads, quote, "The Lord Yahweh saw the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. Etzer mashhebot libo rakra kol hayom," end quote. And Genesis 8:21 reads similarly, quote, "And when the Lord Yahweh smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Etzer leb ha'adam ra miniorav. Nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done," end quote. The expression here is Etzer hara, creation of evil or evil inclination. And a similar expression, Etzer hatov, means creation of good or good inclination. According to rabbinic doctrine, every human person has two inclinations or instincts, one pulling upwards, the other downwards. These are the good inclination, Etzer Hatov, and the evil inclination, Etzer Hara. The evil inclination is frequently identified in the rabbinic literature and elsewhere with the sex instinct, but the term also denotes physical appetites in general, aggressive emotions, and uncontrolled ambitions. Although the evil inclination is bad, this does not have anything to do with evil inside or intrinsic. Indeed, in the rabbinic scheme, the evil inclination provides human life with its driving power, and as such is essential to human life. As a well-known midrash, kind of Jewish interpretation, 1st century, Genesis Rabbah puts it, were it not for the evil inclination, no one would build a house or have children or engage in commerce. This is why, according to the Midrash, Scripture says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good," Genesis 1:31. Good refers to the good inclination. very good to evil inclination, according to the rabbinic interpretation. It is not too far-fetched to read into this homily the idea that life without driving force of evil inclination would no doubt still be good, but it would be a colorless, uncreative, pallid kind of good. Here is a similar situation with Paul warning, quote, "Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger," end quote. Ephesians 4:26. That which makes life very good is the human capacity to struggle against the environment, and this is impossible without egotistic as well as altruistic, aggressive as well as peaceful instincts. The rabbinic view is then realistic at the best. Human beings are engaged in a constant struggle against their propensity for evil, but if they so desire, they can keep it under control when the Torah is studied and when there is submission to its discipline. Morbid guilt feelings are banished, and life is no longer clouded by the fear that the evil inclination will bring about one's ruination. But who are the agents behind the sin covered with this kind of bad or evil inclinations? As we already saw, Etzer Hava, evil inclination, is not a demon like sin in Genesis 4:7, but is the outcome of the wicked angel Samael's influence on humankind. In one of the Jewish stories, Samael is described as Cain's father, quote, "And Adam knew about his wife Eve that she had conceived by Samael, the wicked angel of the Lord, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. He resembled the upper one angels and not the lower ones, and she therefore said, I have acquired a man indeed, an angel of the Lord," end quote. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. Here are a few agents behind the scenes that we encounter in the Hebrew Bible. But nota bene, Hebrew Bible or Old Testament is not a treatise of systematic theology or dogmatic theology in the sense we use today, but rather a collection of various texts and schools of thoughts, so a wide variety of views, sometimes contradicting one another, about different themes, one of them being, what is the source of evil in this world? One of the most known agents is Satan himself, Satan. Satan in Hebrew means accuser, opponent, adversary, slanderer, deriving from a verbal root, Satan, to accuse. So it is not a proper personal name, but rather attribute, a qualifier of this enigmatic figure who is part of God's court. In the earliest occurrences in the Bible, Satan is depicted as an angel of God who is doing some work for God, a kind of prosecutor, showing to God who are the bad humans who need to be punished. So this is the role of Satan in the story of Job, Job chapters 1 through 3. Satan is one of the Bnei HaElohim, sons of God, or divine beings, making God's court. Job chapter 1:6 reads, "One day the divine beings, in Hebrew Bnei HaElohim, literally sons of God, presented themselves before the Lord, Yahweh, and Satan, the adversary, came along with them," end quote. Satan, the prosecutor, has access to God, and God talks about Job as a model of human being obedient to God. Satan, the prosecutor, doubts the real motives of Job's goodness. Here, Satan crosses over his duties to report to God about the misdeeds of humans. He is the accuser, the doubter. But Satan turns here into an investigator and asks God to allow him to test Job. Here is the dialogue between God and Satan. This is the only case in the entire Hebrew Bible. Job chapter 2, verses 2 through 6, quote, "The Lord said to Satan, the adversary, the slanderer, 'Where have you been?' The adversary answered the Lord, 'I have been roaming all over the earth.' And the Lord said to the adversary, 'Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. He still keeps his integrity. So you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason.' The adversary answered the Lord, 'Skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give up for his life. But lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face.' So the Lord said to the adversary, 'See, he is in your power. Only spare his life.'" End quote. And Satan launches his arsenal against the righteous Job. Yes, Satan was perceived in the early phase of Israel's religious history as God's prosecutor / investigator. Same neuter profile is found in Zechariah chapter 3, verses 1 through 2, but not as the source of evil in this world or as arch enemy of God. This transformation will happen later on during the post-Babylonian exile period, during the Second Temple period, and will continue in the New Testament times. For instance, in Revelation 12, 7, 9, and 21 to 3, and 7 to 15, the descriptions of the battle between Michael and Satan, like we see on this mosaic from St. Apollinarius, St. Archangel Michael, and Satan in blue colors, with the latter being overthrown and the great judgment, are based on Jewish judgment and resurrection tradition found in First Enoch and the book of Daniel. Or in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 12, the parousia sin, Satan will come with all deceit of wickedness, adikias. Here, God, truth, and gospel are contrasted to Satan and adikia. While Satan is not depicted in the book of Job as the enemy of God, at least, his view on Job being rejected by God indicates the beginning of this transformation of Satan as investigator, the one doubting in God's justice, and ultimately as a sinister figure, so found in Zechariah 1:8 and Haggai. The first human called Satan in the Old Testament is David. Something similar happens in the New Testament when Jesus calls Peter, his apostle, Satan. The Philistines called David their adversary, Satan, in 1 Samuel 29:4. In the Old Testament, there are 26 times or places of the noun Satan. In 7 of these occurrences, Satan refers to a terrestrial Satan, accuser, like David. And in 19 places, the word Satan refers to a celestial Satan, enemy, like in the book of Numbers 22:22, Job chapter 1 and 2, Zechariah chapter 3, and 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Job 1 and 2 is the only place in the Old Testament where God and Satan converse to one another. From Job, we learn that Satan cannot act independently, only by divine permission. In 1 Chronicles 21:1, Satan incited David to take a census of his people. This is the only place in the Old Testament where Satan appears without definite article. This is a sign that Satan here is a proper name, not a simple attribute or qualifier, meaning accuser, slanderer, adversary. Interestingly, if in 2 Samuel 24:1, it is Yahweh or God who incites David to take a census, and then God, chastises David for this deed. In 1 Chronicles chapter 21, it is Satan who does the dirty job, inciting David to take the census. This reflects a shift in who is to be blamed for evil or source of evil, Yahweh or Satan. The latter is the choice during this late intertestamentary period. To sum up, in Job 1:2, Satan was a maligner of character. In Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1, he was an accuser of God's servant high priest Joshua. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1, Satan was a seducer of Israel's leader David. In the Old Testament, Satan is associated with sin, that enigmatic demon encountered for the first time in Genesis 4:7, and not with the primordial realm, the deep of Genesis 1:2, or an event like the fall of angels. Old Testament authors were reluctant to construe Satan as an anti-God character, a symbol and source of evil. Old Testament never promoted a dualistic view on existence. In Old Testament, the metaphysical evil was reduced to the moral evil, sin. So God was in control of everything. Satan as a personal name appears, besides 1 Chronicles 21:1 and Psalm 109:6, in the book Jubilees, a Jewish writing from the 2nd century before Christ, an Assumption of Moses, another pseudepigraphium. Both writings dating back to about 168 BC, during the persecution of Antiochus IV Epiphanes against the Jews. In Jubilees, the most used name for devil or Satan is Mastema, hater, enemy. In Qumran text, Satan appears only 3 times. Here, the emblematic name for the one leading the forces of darkness is Belial, meaning worthless one. This word, common noun, appears also in the Old Testament. Gradually, Belial becomes a proper name in Qumran. Rabbinic texts identify the serpent in the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, with Satan. Satan is also identified with the evil inclinations mentioned in Genesis 6 and 8. The rabbis would say that Satan has power over 364 days of the year, but only one day, the Day of Atonement, Satan has no power. This explanation is based on the numeric value of the Hebrew word Satan. The numeric value here is 364 if we add each letter of the word Satan, we come up with 364, the full year without a day, the Day of Atonement. In the New Testament, Satan is mentioned 35 times. The name Diabolos appears 32 times. New Testament makes it clear that Satan's power is limited, as we saw already in the book of Job. Other agents behind the scenes are Behemoth and Leviathan, mentioned in Job chapter 40 and 41. These are the symbolic names for evil powers. And God says to Job that every day he has to keep fighting against these demons or these monsters, Behemoth and Leviathan. Another one is Rahab, mentioned in Psalm 89:10, and then Lucifer, or Eosphorus, carrier of light, mentioned symbolically in Isaiah chapter 14, starting with verse 12. But these are more symbols of hostile powers, demonic forces, and not real entities as anti-gods. The Old Testament speaks about demons. The Old Testament and Jewish pseudeographer prefer to talk about demons than about an anti-God character. It fitted better with the monotheistic faith, God being in control of sin and of demons associated to sin. The Jewish demonology knows two groups of demons, Seirim and Shedim. Other demons mentioned in the Old Testament are Azazel, mentioned in Leviticus 16, referring to the Day of Atonement. Asmodeus, found in the book of Tobit, may be related to Hebrew Shamat, to destroy, the destroyer. One thing is sure, the demonization of cosmos was fought against by the Old Testament prophets so that only Yahweh Elohim, the Lord God, may reign serenely in heaven and on earth.
Hyper